Travel is more than just ticking off countries. It's about the people, the culture, the food, the moments. I'm Pippa Hudson, and on Wonder the World, I invite you to join me every week as we explore destinations both near and far, with the help of fellow adventurers who share their unique travel stories. Listen to my podcast wherever you get them.
Relationship issues?
Relationship Talk
on 702.
We all know that relationships, at least intimate relationships, are supposed to be an umbilical cord between two individuals from which there would be a flow of emotions and values and principles, including trust, warmth, love, and all those fuzziness. Of course, there would be disagreements in between. But what happens if you do not share the same connection with your partner as you do with your colleague, your friend, your church mate, or anyone else outside that relationship? So today we thought we'll look at that. I mean, we form bonds either with co-workers, old friends. You can't just form bonds with your lover, right? You do need bonds with other people, because chances are when that person found you, or you found them, or you met, there were other people already in the fray. So though you would have bonds with other people as well. Chances are you've got a best friend from the opposite sex or the same sex. It doesn't matter. It could be that you have bonds with your colleagues or that cousin who's very close to you. But at what point does a deep emotional connection become a threat to your relationship? Where you feel that this bond with my colleague at work, it's too close for comfort. It may put my marriage into jeopardy if not checked, because I go to her for almost every single thing. This person knows everything about me, my cousins, my siblings, my partner at home, my kids. Is it just innocent? Should we leave it as it is and say, hey, listen, people are allowed to bond with whomever they want to bond with. Yeah, they'll come back to you for that relationship, for that intimacy in a relationship, but they can bond with other people. But that relationship outside could just really be a threat to that relationship. When does a meaningful friendship start to feel more like emotional cheating? Quietly, even though you may justify it. It feels like cheating because you share with this person very, very sensitive stuff that probably you don't share with your husband or your wife or your partner or your spouse. But with this person, you're yourself. The walls are down. Is it emotional cheating? Or is it democracy in a relationship? These subtle yet powerful dynamics of emotional intimacy may exist outside your relationship. Have you questioned your partner's friendship or found yourself emotionally drawn to someone else? Has an emotional connection threatened your relationship? Let us know on 011-883-0702, 011-883-0702. Alternatively, send a voice message to 072-702-1702. My guest is relationship coach Dudu Nhlabathi-Madonsela, and she's sitting right in front of me. Dudu, welcome. Lovely to have you with us.
How are you?
I am free. How are you?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. You're free. I'm good. I can't complain.
That's an interesting one. But I'm glad that you're here and to speak about these very sensitive stuff. Mm-hmm. It seems simple on the surface, but I think the depth of it really is a crux of what goes wrong in society. Yeah. So let's kick off, Dudu. Mm-hmm. Are emotional connections outside your relationship inherently wrong? When you have these deep connections outside your relationship with your spouse, is that wrong?
I think society starts worrying about it if it's with the opposite sex or the sex that you're attracted to. Because I think everyone has emotional connections. There are things, you cannot find everything in a partner, right? And simply because people go through life stages, people evolve. Yeah. You also go through whatever it is that you're going through. And sometimes your partner's not the best person to be able to understand what you're particularly going through at that moment. Most of the time, as females, we'll share these deep thoughts and some of the things that we wouldn't share with our partners, with our girlfriends. And I think when it is the opposite sex, and someone you could potentially enter a relationship with, that starts becoming a bit questionable, especially to your partner. And I think the main thing with people is that I find it a little bit dangerous if that emotional connection takes away the connection you have with your partner. When now the joys and the moments that you would have shared with your partner are no longer meaningful, and they're more meaningful with somebody else. I think that's when you start becoming worried about that emotional connection. And you need to ask yourself, why are you gravitating towards the other person? Sometimes you gravitate because it's an escapism from what's happening in your relationship. And you're not addressing the issues in your relationship. Sometimes you're gravitating towards other people because the reality that your relationship is no longer emotionally fulfilling. And because there's certain structures in place in your relationship, with either you have kids, you're married, you've got a business together and so forth, it's just easier to find a substitute than to actually leave that particular relationship. So you need to ask yourself that question as to why are you gravitating towards this particular person, and what does it take away from your relationship? Because I think the main thing is that when it starts taking away, when it's not taking away anything from your relationship. And I mean, we can form deep friendships with other people that we're not necessarily attracted to. So, and I don't want to give like a blanket approach type of answer that says that, every time you form a connection with somebody outside the relationship, especially the sex that you might be attracted to, that it means that there's something wrong with your relationship, or that particular relationship that you are now entertaining should be forbidden. But what I do say is that you have to ask yourself, how much time are you spending with this person who's not in the relationship with? And to what extent is that taking away the time that you should be spending with your partner?
Forming that bond to start off with, isn't it a gateway to emotional cheating anyway? Because you may just go down the line and spiral out of control without realizing it. So right at the beginning, isn't it important to curb it and draw the boundaries right at the beginning?
I think your question is based on the fact that you assume that everyone reflects and everyone is aware of themselves and understands themselves. I think a lot of people find themselves in the situation, even if it was not their intention. It's a matter of, I work next to this person and we spend so much time together that I find myself connecting to this person, and then 6 months down the line, I realize actually this relationship has taken a form that is much more deeper than I anticipated. I mean, the textbook answer should be, people should be so self-aware, they should be able to self-regulate early. But self-regulation comes as a result of self-awareness. And a lot of people are not self-aware. And I think a self-aware person, after a while, especially when now the urge to spend time with the other person outweighs the urge to spend time with your partner, that's when they would stop and ask themselves, okay, what's going on here? But a person who's not self-aware, and self-awareness comes with wisdom, with age. Could be a 25-year-old, and you're not expecting that degree of self-awareness with a 25-year-old. And a person who's not is probably going to find themselves in that situation.
But precisely because we don't reflect, precisely because we are not self-aware, isn't it dangerous to commence those relationships to start off with because we're not aware? And I mean, if I know that my driving is not that good, why would I be taking a high-performance vehicle in a very wet, dangerous situation? Because I know that my driving is not that good anyway. So that lack of introspection, reflection should be the reason why I don't even initiate any of that.
It's like saying that then, based on your question, then a lot of people should not be starting relationship, even friendships. Because on the basis of saying that you should be self-aware in order to form relationships, right? And that is in a beautiful, ideal world. But as human beings, there's also reasons why people are the way they are, right? And I think what we take it from is that sometimes we lose context as to why people do the things that they do. And there's a lot of people whereby, because of the context that they come from, the journey to self-awareness is much more harder than it is for other people. So people have been rooted in trauma, things like, for example, you've been inundated and burdened with certain things, like things like poverty taxes the mind. And if you look at a lot of society where there are poor individuals, they usually engage in bad decision making. And then people think, no, but you know what? There are brilliant minds that come out of poverty. We cannot assume that poor people are stupid, right? And it's not necessarily an intellect thing, but it's the fact that because they are inundated with so many decisions that they need to make in a day, it taxes the mind and they end up making poor decisions.
Sure. But that's also not an exclusive preserve of people in a certain economic bracket.
Exactly,
because we also see that across all brackets. And some may even argue that the more exposed you are,
the poorer your decisions.
Yeah, definitely, because of exposure and the Maslow's environmental factors come into being. That you travel the world, you see 1,000 people in a day more than you would the one that you are with. So that predisposes you to those nefarious elements.
Yeah. So, and that's why I talk about context, because for me, and the reason why I come back to this is that, there's a lot of advice on the net. There's a lot of advice. I mean, even this topic itself has been discussed by somebody somewhere. But yet the solutions don't come. And because the advice is not rooted on why people do the things they do and why people behave the way they behave.
Yeah.
And I think if you want to address something, you first have to understand why people make the decisions that they make.
Sure.
To what degree of consciousness do they make that decision? And I think circling back to your question where you are saying that should a person who's not self-aware even engage in such a relationship?
Yeah.
It's a matter of, it's not a yes or no answer, because of the fact that if context is as such that it doesn't allow the person to actualize the way we desire them to, most likely they're going to make decisions without being conscious of it.
Perhaps not how we desire them to, but how that would be appropriate in the context of their relationship, because there would be, I assume, relationships that would survive all of that and make a comeback. But if yours is weaker and you're still connecting with Thabo every other day, and your husband and your relationship with your husband is something else, clearly you're putting it to a risk. Let's take a quick break. I want us to be practical when we come back.
Yes.
And I want us to answer the question, could it be that is the reason why teachers date teachers mostly? Why Metro Police cops date other and marry other Metro cops mainly? It's not prevalent in the media space, by the way, where we work.
Are you sure?
Where we work.
Are you sure?
It's not a pronouncement on Prime Media or any other radio station in the country. 19 minutes after 11 o'clock.
Relationship issues
Relationship talk.
on 702.
22 minutes after 11 o'clock, you're on 702, Relationship Focus. It is. Dudu Nhlabathi-Madonsela is relationship coach, and she's my guest. We are exploring the phenomenon of emotional connection outside your intimate relationship, outside your bond with your spouse, your partner, your wife, your husband. Do you have a close proximity emotionally with someone else where it starts to feel like cheating? Isn't that a threat to your relationship? What do? We're human beings. Sometimes you are lured into it. You didn't intentionally kick off this thing to be where you are. It could be that you started joking off at work nicely and you ended up so closely. You asked about their kids, they shared, and there was so much in common. The conversation flowed. Next day, 2 years later, they know all your secrets, you know all theirs, and somehow it's not as it is at home. What do you do? I'd love to hear from you. Remember, you can always remain anonymous. Ne? It could be that you are a pillow or a crutch to someone who's going through that and you want to share with us. Feel free to do so. Erase your name and then share with us. 011-883-0702. It could be that you are brave enough to speak about it because it happened in your previous relationship or it doesn't threaten your current situation. Most welcome to send your voice note to 072-702-1702. Speaking of voice notes, Adel, I've been neglecting some.
Yes, hello, Thabo, Tyron Randburg. 100%, my friend. That's exactly what the door you're opening. You're opening the potential door to actually cheat. So don't do it. We are sinners by nature, and therefore, if we open doors that we're going to fall in or potentially fall in, it's not a good idea. So I totally agree with you, Thabo. Stay away.
We are fallible beings. Fallible beings.
Clearly. I I think during the break we spoke about, and I'm going to this word that you use about somebody being an emotional clutch, right? And I discourage people to do that. First thing, I think no one should wound bond, even in platonic relationships. I don't think people should base relationships on the fact that I always say I never make friendships with people in their low or in my low. Because when I have recovered as a person, I'm no longer going to vibrate with these people, and it will be very difficult to get rid of these people.
Oh
right?
my goodness.
And I think I discourage people to form friendships or any sort of relationship based on the fact that you are coming through for a person or the person is coming through for you at your particular low. And especially females. And simply because, there's a Kanye West line that, you go through hard times with him and then he leaves you for a white girl. And basically, what it's saying is that when a person is the worst version of themselves, they usually attract people who are similar to them and surround themselves with people that they can wound bond with. And when they become the best version of themselves, you are the very thing that they no longer want to be associated with. And I find that, especially in this work wife thing, a lot of females end up being the losers in all of this.
Yeah.
And the reason why they lose out in all of this is simply because of the fact that usually those people come together because there's a void in their lives.
Yeah.
And what happens is that you deviate their attention from home, and smart wives know once the attention is deviated from home, there are things that they can do in order to improve the marriage. But there's not a lot of pressure on them.
Yes.
And when the relationship is back on track, then you become the problem in that particular relationship. And you feel like you're investing in a friendship and you feel used at the end because this person has particularly moved on. So for me, the basis of why this emotional connection is happening, I think people need to question themselves. And because if you don't question yourself, there's nothing as worse as being heartbroken outside and you can't tell your wife about it. Or you can't tell your husband about it. But this person can see something is not right. And it becomes a little bit difficult.
Allow me to read this text very quickly, Dudu. But before I do, for purposes of context, because we work in this environment, there's nothing wrong with dating a white girl.
No, there's nothing. No.
Nothing. Not that I have, but I'm just saying there's nothing wrong with dating a white. But all in jest. I think all in jest, right? So let's go to your text messages. This one says, morning emotionally indefinitely is the start of an affair. I fell in love with a colleague due to that, and we did get intimate. We almost ruined our marriages. This comes from Anonymous. How quickly can things spiral out of control, especially if the two of you do not have high quality emotional breaks?
Depends on how big is the void. The bigger the void, the more likely you're going to want to look for that in somebody else, and the more likely you're more likely to hang on to
the
another
void
person.
Between who?
Between the partner, so husband and wife. So if, let's say, for example, I decide that there's a colleague at work that I'm forming an emotional connection with, but I'm unhappy at home, and there's this particular void that I need the other person to fill. There's a guy called Robert Greene, and he talks about the art of seduction in his book, In the Art of Seduction. He says the most effective way to seduce a person is to be able to find the void. And basically he says we walk around with an unmet need. And if you can understand where that unmet need resides in a person, it's much more easier to be able to emotionally manipulate that particular person. And I think a lot of times, if we're forming connections because of an unmet need, we're more likely to fall for the next person quicker.
We are going to take the news in a short while. Dudu, this is a very sensitive issue, and I know that it has affected a number of relationships where in many instances guys were really unhappy about ladies having that kind of emotional connection with their male colleagues and male besties out there, and she would insist, I don't know why you're threatened by this guy. Mike is just my friend. We've known each other for years. And you're like, hey, Mike, Mike is dangerous, but she insists because there is a certain level of innocence in her heart. We'll touch on that. But for now, it's exactly 11:30.
Relationship issues
Relationship talk.
on 702.
25 minutes to 12 o'clock. Thanks very much for hanging around with us. We are on Relationship Focus every Friday between 11 and 12. Clement has this feature and it opens our eyes to a number of aspects of relationships. So we're asking, just if you've just joined us, about emotional connections outside your intimate relationship. Does it or can it threaten your marriage or your intimate relationship? Meaning you could be having a work wife or a work husband, or there's someone out there or some Uncle Charlie there who is your bestie. You speak about everything else and you gossip about Thabo or Adele or Clement or someone else. And this guy is very, very close to you. For some reason, you feel so free to be with them. You tell him stuff that you can't tell your husband, you know. He gets it. He just gets it. And then that could be a threat to your relationship. Dudu Nhlabathi-Madonsela is guiding us, navigating us through those murky waters. Dudu, where do we say this is jealousy and where do we say this is genuine concern, especially from the side of a spouse who is a spectator to
all of this
match?
It's genuine concern when it's impacting your relationship. So now where I feel like I'm competing with the next person for your time, for your attention, for your emotional connection. I think what we have to think about, not jealousy, so it's concern, right? Jealousy is when, remember, we project as human beings, right? So it could be very innocent, but because of the fact that I'm projecting what I'm projecting of what I've seen when I was growing up, maybe my father cheated on my mother with the lady next door, or certain things happened, I could be projecting where there's nothing there. But I think if there is, and because we women can be very, very emotional and we can make decisions or observations based on our emotions and not necessarily what is fact. And my advice is that you should have observed this and then collect data points to say, actually, this is how this relationship has interfered in our marriage. And I think the other genuine concern, especially a lot of women feel it when they start off relationships and this man had a circle of friends, especially females, that he was quite close to. There's a level of respect that you need to grant a person when they're in a relationship, right? In terms of there's certain boundaries now that even if the person has not set those boundaries, but you respect the fact that this person now is in a relationship. If I used to come to your house and open your fridge because there was no girlfriend and now there's a mama wasekaya and so forth or whatever, I need to respect that this is her space too. And I think in that instance also it becomes a concern when you have voiced your discomfort to your partner and your partner does not take you seriously and reverts to you're either being jealous, you're projecting and so forth and does not sit down to thoroughly understand your concerns. I think that becomes a point of concern because a person who's really into you really wants to keep you happy.
And that's a gist of it, right? And they don't go out of their way to make your life a misery or to make you compete with someone that you don't even see that often, someone that you don't know about, because they realize that then it's a one-way stream wherein you are competing with a ghost and you can never ever win. Let me touch on this text message quickly. I would like you to reflect on it, Dudu, if you will. It says, my husband was never available emotionally to me. He had a female friend that he spent too much time with at work to a point where he was discussing even our menu at home. The friend would drop her kids at my house and later my husband would join her. So I would also throw, it would be so complicated. So I'd also be forced to become a babysitter. Now that we're divorced, I wonder why they're not together.
Let's start with their relationship. Their relationship, she was a wife of convenience. That doesn't sound like a guy who was into her or who was in love with her. Didn't respect her her territory, didn't respect her emotions. And when you ask in terms of you wonder why they're not married, I actually heard a story where a guy had a wife and then had a side chick. And when the wife found out about the side chick, he left the guy and the relationship with the side chick then dissolved.
Yeah.
And because the wife was the anchor of the
Yes.
system, you know, it was the anchor of this guy, and this guy, you know, he was the best version of himself when there was somebody anchoring
Exactly.
that person. And probably that's what is happening, is that because you are a wife of convenience and you were the anchor in this whole ecosystem, when the anchor is gone, the guy's a bit lost in terms of who he is without this particular anchor.
Yeah.
And and that particular person, she fulfilled the 30%. And not necessarily the 70%.
Oh my.
And now that the 70%, which he didn't appreciate, is gone, he can't base his selection of a partner on the 30% that is available.
Interesting stuff. This is really, really folding our sleeves and getting into it.
But there's something you mentioned that was very interesting.
Yeah.
And it was around, the best measures of the various sexes are the same sex people. So what do I mean? You'll have male friends, and then they'll bring this girl, and you're like, red flags.
Yeah.
And he sees nothing, and he's in love, and the other guys are like, hi, you guys talk too much, and stuff like that. Because females know each other.
Yes.
And we know the nonverbal cues that are given off, that we can spot the red flags. And I think also what happens with these work husbands, it's the debate that people have, that can two opposite sexes that can potentially be attracted to each other have a platonic relationship, right? Yeah. And the whole idea is that females, we can approach a relationship with a male with the naivety that this could be platonic. Yeah. But there's always an argument that the guy who wants to befriend you is the guy who's sitting on the sidelines. And then, one mistake pazama, and then, he gets his opportunity.
99% of the time.
Yes, he gets. And I think that's why the whole idea of a work husband does not necessarily sit well with men, because men know their nature.
Yes.
And, they're assessing it based on their nature, while you have the other person who says, but I'm approaching this from a perspective of a female, and that's not our nature, and hence I do not see the red flags that you're presenting to me.
Yes, and how did we end up together? I was playing the same role.
Exactly.
That's how we ended up together. 011-883-0702. I would like to take your voice notes now, and do call in. And I would want to hear what you think of this. 011-883-0702.
Morning. Yes, interesting conversation. I think for me the key word here is boundaries. It maybe speaks to what your guest is saying about not going too far in relationships when you're low, because then typically your boundaries are not strong. If your boundaries are strong, you wouldn't confuse a friendship with a deeply intimate relationship and cross the line. Boundaries are very important, and healthy boundaries are very important.
Good morning, Thabo, and your guest. Interesting topic. So I just believe that when you've got a platonic relationships like that one at work, or if you meet a guy or a girl and you are just friends, there is always one party that wants more. Or it's either both parties want more, but there's one party that wants more. And that's one of the risks. The second thing is, between you and your partner, you need to sit down and discuss what red flags are, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Because if you don't have those boundaries set, then it's a recipe for disaster, a recipe for complete disaster. Ralph in Boksburg.
Good morning, Thabo. Look, we are all human beings, and before anything takes place or happen or gets into your mind, you are made aware of it psychologically as an individual, to a point where you are also given an opportunity to make a decision whether do you want to entertain what you are feeling about this person or the next person or not. So I agree with those people who say, look, once that actually gets into your system or your mind, just don't go ahead with it. Don't do it, because you allow it to manifest, then that's when cheating comes. It starts really there by allowing it. So some things, they just have to be stopped even before they begin. Otherwise, the whole marriage will come crumbling down. Thank you, Edward.
Edward is talking about lead us not into temptation.
I love what Edward is saying. First, I love his opening statement, the fact that we are human. And I think the reason why I love that opening statement is because the voice note before, the guy spoke about, it's almost like you create a template in your relationship and you're like, these are boundaries and this is what you think is red flags. And that is nice in an ideal world as a textbook answer. But we are human and we evolve as people. And also, to be able to hold your end of the bargain, the other person has to hold the end of the bargain.
Yes.
And most of the time, relationship goes through ebbs and lows, right? And as much as a person could be committed to whatever template you've put in place, but when the lows hit and the other person is not keeping their end of the bargain, the human part, the human component comes in. And I think it was Edward, right, the last guy,
yes,
to his point around being able to self-govern. And that's very, very important because no one knows how you feel. No one else knows how you feel except you. You're the first person to know and to understand your emotions, right? Mm-hmm. And they manifest in behaviors. So even if sometimes you haven't had time to reflect, but now you're engaging in behaviors, I want to call this person more, I want to text this person more, now starting to hide conversations from my husband with this person, you are the person who's aware of that first. You need to have the ability to self-govern. And self-governing means that you have an honest conversation with yourself. You're able to call yourself out. Unfortunately, a lot of people justify their actions.
Yeah.
It's because last week, because he irritated me, this and this and this. And they deflect the responsibility from themselves. And I think the one thing that keeps relationships intact is when the person values the relationship. And there's a lot of people who are in marriages and who are in relationships where they no longer find value in that particular relationship. And then it becomes an issue of it is because of something outside. And it could have been Thabo.
Yes.
It could have been Lisiba. It could have been Matthew. It could have been Mark. It could have been anyone.
It's incidental in the
Yes. And it's almost like you can even argue that you went to seek that work husband psychologically in the back of your mind because you wanted to be able to deviate from self-accountability and making big decisions. And I think overall this conversation has less to do with the fact that whether these so-called platonic relationships are right or wrong. I think it has a lot to do with to what extent do we hold ourselves accountable for our lives instead of blaming other people.
Once you find out that your partner has been emotionally cheating, and I have air quotes for those who can see, has been cheating with work wife, work husband, do you forgive or do you understand that emotional cheating? Answer that after.
Relationship issues?
Relationship talk.
On 702.
10 minutes to 12 o'clock. My guest, Dudu Nhlabathi-Madonsela, relationship coach. And we are looking at emotional connections outside your relationship, outside your intimate relationship or marriage. You connecting with other people outside your spouse's consent. And do you think that it may be a threat somehow to your intimate relationship? 011-883-0702. Here's a voice note.
Thabo, good morning. Thanks for the great show. Thabo, I think there's two things here. One, once you get into a serious relationship, I think you need to set boundaries with your friends of the opposite sex, what they can and cannot do. Maybe there are certain things that you could do with them, go out at night, be called at any time because you didn't have a partner. But now that there is a partner, those boundaries need to be set because at times if you don't set them, your friends will continue behaving the same way only to find that there has been changes in your life, And I think we also must respect the fact that we are opposite sex, we generally will attract one another. And personally, I don't think it's worked for me. I've tried this friendship thing with opposite sex. It never ends well, Thabo. I don't want to lie, it never ends well. There will be that time where it just goes off the rails, and the next morning you are both regretting, and
Yeah.
it can't be changed, So it's just better not to have very close relationships with friends of the opposite sex.
Yeah. And we've explored that, Dudu. I just want you to touch on another issue. To what extent can that be prevalent in a circle of couples wherein one of the partners is close to one of the members of a different couple? Meaning it could be you and I are dating, and Abel and Cindy are dating, and whoever else is in our circle. There are four of us, four couples in that circle. But for some reason, you as my partner, you become very close to Abel.
Yeah.
Is that, does that happen?
So there's a couple of things. There's a theory that says if one of the partners die, the remaining partner is more likely to date one of their friends. Right? Yeah, it's the
Really?
Yeah, the likelihood is quite high, and the reason why is that we surround ourselves with people with similar values. So your husband's friend probably shares similar values to your husband, and what attracted you to your husband and what you appreciated about this person was the value system that he brought into the relationship. And now you have somebody, and most of the time, sometimes, especially around death, is that first you won't bond together because you've
lost.
Yeah, you've lost somebody that you deeply care about, and you guys can relate to each other based on each other's grief. But on top of that, you are wound bonding with somebody who shares similar values with your partner and probably similar interests with your partner, and actually matches the description of somebody that you might have entered a relationship with based on those qualities, right? And this is the reason why, I always say to a lot of married women, the person who's likely to cheat with your husband is not the slay queen, but actually within his social circle. That's the biggest threat to your relationship. It's not the slay queen. It's somebody that, in when you look at what forms attraction, proximity forms attraction. And when people have proximity, they're more likely to be exposed to the same things in life and similar interests and similar values. And it's easier to form some kind of rapport or some kind of connection with this particular person. And if a person is more likely to cheat, they're more likely to find somebody who shares similar interests and values, and that's more likely to be in their social circle.
Yeah. Sure. Hey, people are naughty out there, man.
It's not
so
naughty.
If you are like, if I pass on for whatever reason, I shudder to think.
Yeah, you must worry more about your friends.
Those
you must
idiots,
worry more about your friends than you worry about the guy
they've
down.
got their eye fixed. Not necessarily.
Yeah, not necessarily.
But then circumstances are conducive for that to thrive.
Exactly.
Okay, guys, I see you. I see what you're doing. 011-883-0702. Here's a text message. It says, I think emotional connections are interesting when we don't blame or bash our partners about every little things, but about us. I'm trying. Let me read it again.
Of the relationship is based on your interests and not necessarily about each other's partners.
Yeah.
But you're not bringing a full version of yourself. So, for example, if I'm with my female friends, and I'm bringing my entirety into that interaction and we're having lunch and so forth, I don't only speak about my whole life. And my life is a frustration around maybe my partner, or my mom is frustrating me, or this family member is doing so. So it's very difficult. And the thing is, we bond on vulnerability as people. The more vulnerable you can be with a person, the deeper the emotional connection. And at some point, especially if you want the relationship to have meaning and depth, you're more likely to become vulnerable. And you're going to be vulnerable about the things that annoy you or are concerning in your particular life. So it'd be interesting to see if people bonded at this level and there wasn't much death, how fulfilling that relationship would be.
We've come to the end of this amazing discussion. Thank you so much, Dudu. But before we say goodbye, how do people reach you on social media and elsewhere who are looking for coaching?
So I go as the peaceful one on social media. I'm a very peaceful person, as you can hear.
I can say.
Radiate peace.
Yeah, the studio is peaceful. Yeah. So you go on social media as
the peaceful one, and all my details around contacting me, you can get them there on various social medias.
I loved talking to you. And of course, there wasn't any inappropriate emotional attachment. I really appreciate having a chat with you and making time to come to the studio.
Okay, thank you, Thabo. It was great.
Dudu Nhlabathi-Madonsela, relationship coach.